The basement was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made every small sound seem louder than it should be. I was sitting on the worn couch near the far wall, surrounded by boxes we hadn't unpacked since the move a few months ago. The air was cooler down here, a welcome escape from the heat outside, but the faint scent of dust and old wood lingered, making it feel almost too still. I fiddled with the remote in my hand, the TV in front of me playing a show I wasn't really watching. It was a rare moment of solitude, something I'd been craving all week with everything going on upstairs. Family dinners, endless small talk, the constant background hum of life in a blended household. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't bad. It was just a lot. "Hey!" The sound of his voice made me jump, and I looked over to see Derek standing at the foot of the stairs, one hand resting casually on the railing. He was still in the t-shirt and jeans he'd been wearing earlier, though his hair was slightly damp like he'd just splashed water on his face. He didn't say anything else, just stood there, his expression unreadable as he looked at me. "Jesus, Derek, you scared me," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. I fumbled with the remote, muting the TV as I tried to steady my breathing. "What are you doing down here?" He shrugged, stepping off the last stair and into the room. "Just wanted to see what you were up to. Thought you could use some company." His tone was casual, easy, but there was something about the way he said it that made my chest tighten. I turned my attention back to the TV, though the screen was frozen on a scene I couldn't even remember. "I'm fine," I said, trying to sound dismissive. "Just needed some quiet." "Doesn't seem like you're enjoying it," he said, walking further into the room. He stopped near one of the boxes, nudging it with his foot as he glanced around. "Kind of depressing down here, don't you think?" I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't stop the small smile that tugged at the corner of my mouth. "It's peaceful." Derek smirked, moving to sit on the other end of the couch. His presence changed the room immediately. The quiet, no longer soothing, but charged with something I couldn't quite name. He leaned back, stretching his arms along the top of the couch, his body language as relaxed as ever. "You've been avoiding me," he said after a moment, his tone light but probing. I blinked, caught off guard. "What? No, I haven't." "Yes, you have," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at me. "Every time I try to talk to you, you find some excuse to leave. What's up with that?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, though the heat rising in my face betrayed me. I focused on the remote in my hands, twisting it between my fingers. "Come on," he said, leaning forward slightly. "You're not exactly subtle, you know?" I didn't respond, my heart pounding in my chest. He was right, of course. I had been avoiding him, though not intentionally, at least not at first. It was just that every time we were in the same room, the air seemed to shift, like there was something unspoken hanging between us. Something I didn't know how to deal with. Derek sighed, his tone softening. "Look, if I did something to piss you off, just tell me, okay? I don't want things to be weird between us." "You didn't do anything," I said quickly, glancing at him. I've had a lot on my mind lately." He studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Okay," he said finally, "but you know you can talk to me, right? About anything." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard, and I nodded, though I couldn't quite meet his eyes. "Yeah, I know." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy, the kind that made every small sound seem amplified. I could feel Derek watching me, and my pulse quickened, the weight of his gaze almost too much. "You're not a very good liar, you know," he said, his voice quiet but teasing. I laughed, though it came out more like a nervous chuckle. "Yeah, well, I guess I'll have to work on that." Derek didn't respond, but when I glanced at him, his expression had shifted. There was something softer there now, something that made my chest tighten even more. He leaned back again, his arm brushing against mine as he settled into the couch. "You know," he said, his tone casual but with an edge I couldn't quite place, "I'm glad we ended up in the same house. I wasn't sure how it was going to work at first, but it's been nice having you around. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. Yeah, I said softly. It's been nice. He smiled, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The quiet stretched out, the only sound the faint hum of the muted TV. I felt the tension in the room build, a low hum of electricity that made my skin prickle. Do you ever think about how things might have been different? Derek asked suddenly, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. What do you mean? I asked, my throat dry. He shrugged, his gaze fixed on the TV. I don't know. Just, if things were different. If we weren't. He trailed off, his meaning clear even without the words. My chest tightened, and I felt my pulse quicken as I tried to process what he was saying. I don't think about it, I said, though the words felt heavy and unconvincing even as I said them. Derek looked at me then, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. You're a terrible liar, he said softly. The air between us was thick, charged, and I felt my hands clench into fists to keep them from shaking. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to break the moment that had wrapped itself around us like a cocoon. Derek, I began, but my voice faltered as he leaned closer, his presence overwhelming. You can tell me to stop, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. But if you don't... He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The unspoken question hung in the air, and I felt myself teetering on the edge of something I couldn't name. The tension between us was so palpable that it felt as though the air itself had thickened, leaving no room for escape. Derek was close now, his presence filling every corner of the basement, and I couldn't bring myself to look away from him. His words lingered in my mind, the quiet vulnerability in his voice making it impossible to dismiss what was happening between us. My breath hitched as he reached out, his hand hovering just above mine where it rested on the couch. He didn't move any closer, waiting instead, as if giving me a chance to make the next decision. The air felt heavy, oppressive, and yet I couldn't bring myself to pull away. I don't know if this is a good idea, I said finally, my voice trembling. Derek's lips curved into a faint smile, though there was a sadness in his eyes. Maybe not, he said softly. But sometimes the best things aren't. The way he said it, so simple and yet so full of meaning, made my chest ache. I wanted to argue, to tell him that we shouldn't, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stayed frozen, my heart pounding as he closed the distance between us, his hand brushing lightly against mine. Tell me to stop, he whispered again, his voice barely audible. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I felt myself lean into him, my head dipping just slightly as if pulled by a force I didn't fully understand. Derek's breath caught, and then his lips were on mine, soft, tentative, a question more than an answer. It was like time froze in that moment, the rest of the world fading away until there was nothing but him and the warmth of his touch. His hand cupped my jaw, steadying me as the kiss deepened, his lips moving against mine with a quiet urgency that sent a shiver down my spine. My hands fisted in the fabric of his shirt, holding on as if letting go would send me spiraling into the unknown. When we finally broke apart, our breaths mingling in the narrow space between us, Derek's forehead rested against mine. His hand lingered on my cheek, his thumb brushing lightly against my skin in a way that made my chest ache. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I nodded, though my heart was still racing. "I don't know what this means," I admitted, my voice trembling. "It doesn't have to mean anything right now," Derek said softly. "Just tell me you don't regret it." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the vulnerability in his expression, the way his eyes searched mine for something. Reassurance, maybe, or permission. "I don't," I said finally, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips, and he leaned in again, his lips brushing against mine in another soft, lingering kiss. This one was slower, more deliberate, and I felt myself melt into it, the tension in my chest easing as I let myself get lost in the moment. Derek pulled me closer, his hands sliding down to my waist as he deepened the kiss, his touch both gentle and insistent. The warmth of his body against mine was overwhelming, and I felt a surge of emotion rise in my chest, too big to name, but impossible to ignore. When we broke apart again, Derek's hands lingered on my waist, his thumbs brushing against my sides in a soothing rhythm. "I've thought about this," he admitted, his voice low and filled with something I couldn't quite name. "More than I should have." I swallowed hard, my throat tight as I searched for the right words. "You're not the only one," I said finally, my voice trembling. "But I never thought. I didn't think it could happen." "Well," Derek said softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "it's happening." I couldn't help but laugh, though it came out shaky, my chest still tight with the weight of everything that had just happened. Derek's smile widened and he brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch so tender it made my breath catch. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Now," Derek said, his tone thoughtful. "We take it one step at a time. No pressure, no expectations, just us." "Just us," I echoed, the words feeling heavy but right. Derek's arms tightened around me, pulling me against him in a way that felt grounding, reassuring. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could breathe. The uncertainty was still there, the questions I didn't have answers to, but they didn't feel as overwhelming now. Not with Derek here. We stayed like that for a long time, the quiet of the basement wrapping around us like a cocoon. And as Derek's hand slid up to cradle the back of my head, his lips pressing a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead, I knew one thing for certain. There was no going back now. The basement seemed smaller now, the air thick with everything that had passed between us. Derek's hand lingered against the small of my back, his touch grounding and steady, even as my thoughts raced. I could still feel the imprint of his lips on mine, the way his breath had mingled with mine, and it was almost too much. Almost. But not quite. We sat on the couch in silence for a while, close but not touching. I could feel the warmth of his body beside me, a quiet reassurance that neither of us needed to fill the quiet with meaningless words. My mind was still spinning, but it wasn't frantic anymore. The weight of the moment was big, sure, but it wasn't crushing. Derek broke the silence first. "I'm sorry if I—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair as he looked at me, his expression hesitant. "I didn't mean to make things harder for you." "You didn't," I said quickly, my voice firmer than I expected. "I mean, yeah, it's complicated, but it's not—" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's not bad." His eyes softened and the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. "Okay," he said quietly, leaning back against the couch. "Good." Another pause stretched between us, but this one felt lighter somehow, the weight of it less suffocating. I glanced over at him, studying the way his jaw tensed and relaxed, the way his fingers tapped absently against his knee. He was nervous. Derek, who was always so sure of himself, who had a way of breezing through life like nothing could touch him. Seeing him like this made something in my chest tighten. "I didn't expect this," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not with you." He smiled faintly, his gaze flicking to mine. "Yeah, well, I didn't expect it either, but here we are." The simplicity of his words hit me harder than I thought they would, and I let out a shaky laugh, my fingers gripping the edge of the couch. "Here we are," I echoed. Derek reached out then, his hand brushing lightly against mine before his fingers curled around it. His grip was firm, but not forceful, his thumb tracing slow circles against my skin. The touch sent a shiver down my spine, but it wasn't fear or hesitation. It was something warmer, something steadier. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," he said, his voice low. "We don't have to figure it all out." "I know," I said, my throat tight. "But it's still a lot." I get that, he said softly. But I'm not going anywhere. You know that, right? I nodded, swallowing hard as I looked at him. Yeah, I know. The quiet stretched again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Derek's hand stayed in mine, his touch grounding me as my thoughts began to settle, the whirlwind in my head slowing to something quieter, more manageable. I don't know what this means, I said finally, my voice trembling slightly. I don't even know where to start. Derek smiled, the warmth in his expression making my chest ache. We don't have to start anywhere, he said. We just are. The simplicity of his words was enough to make my breath catch, and I felt my grip on his hand tighten. Okay, I said softly. We are. His smile widened and he shifted closer, his free hand brushing against my cheek. The touch was so tender, so careful, that it made my throat tighten all over again. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was softer this time, slower, but no less meaningful. I felt myself relax into it, the tension in my chest easing as I let myself surrender to the moment. When we pulled apart, Derek rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my skin. You okay? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, I said, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. I'm okay. He smiled again, and the sight of it was enough to make something in me settle. The weight of the world didn't feel so heavy now, not with Derek here, not with his hand still holding mine. We stayed like that for a while, the quiet wrapping around us like a blanket, and as Derek's arms slid around me, pulling me into a loose but steady embrace, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Hope.